Paul Finebaum doesn't think the Big Ten would take Florida State. Excuse me?
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth: realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. We've always got you covered, getting you ready for the season. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Can Washington get revenge from the national championship game? I doubt it. We'll talk about that. And what is the most important, not the biggest, but the most important game as LSU tries to make the playoff for the first time under Brian Kelly in the 12-team era? All coming up on today's show. But Paul Finebaum, I was reading a quote over in Athlon Sports from him that said that the Big Ten might not take Florida State because their academic ranking isn't high enough. Oh, okay. So, first of all, allow me to just say from personal experience, the last conference that placed an incredibly high value on academics over athletics stopped existing as we know it. So, not sure if that's where the Big Ten's heads should be at. That's number one. Number two, Florida State is a historically great program with a long championship pedigree and history, and their television value is undeniable. Their brand appeal is substantial. In what world, if you're the Big Ten, are you in a position to just say, nah, we're not going to take, well, their academic ranking isn't high enough. Okay, guys, I understand there was a point in time in which this was a larger discussion. I remember speaking about it at length about a year ago at this time and all those sorts of considerations. It feels like we've moved past that, haven't we? It feels like in the college football world, somehow, some way, along the timeline of this beautiful, wonderful, great, maddening, but glorious sport, the NCAA lost power and influence over college football, gave it to the conferences, and the conferences gave it to who again? Who is it? Oh, that's right, the television networks. Do you think that the Big Ten media partners would look at the prospect of bringing Florida State into the Big Ten and say, nah, we're good. We're like, we don't need them. You know, they're not a big academic school. You know, like football is driving the bus here. That is readily apparent. And the opportunity for the Big Ten to expand its geographical reach even further, what about their moves in the last 10, 15 years lead you to indicate that they are not interested in having the most national conference they can? I haven't seen anything yet. They weren't going to take, they publicly stated, Tony Petitti, the current commissioner, no, we're not taking it. This is a generalized quote, not an exact one. We're not taking Oregon and Washington right now. Maybe if the price was right, but we're not looking to expand. We're good with what we've got. Oh, look at that. Oregon and Washington going to the Big Ten. What do you know? What do you know? Color me shocked. Maryland and Rutgers, geographic play. Oregon and Washington, part brand, part geographic play. USC, UCLA, part brand, major league geographic play. The opportunity to grab the premier football program in the state of Florida right now, with the recruiting talent that you have there, with the television markets you have there, dipping your toe into the southern part of the country. I mean, the SEC might even feel, probably not, because it's the SEC, but they might say, hey, they're coming into our territory. That we're supposed to be down. I mean, the ACC's over there, but we're not, that worried about the ACC right now. But if the Big Ten suddenly starts making a move down to Florida and gets Florida State, I mean, how do you not take them, or Clemson for that matter? Like, how do you not? I just don't get the sense. Like Oregon, for instance, not exactly what you'd call a premier academic institution that does a ton of research. They have AAU status. That's about all they have for their academic merits. And they added them with no concern, it appears, and welcome them in with open arms, and they will do so officially sometime next week. I think July 1st is the day that they officially become a member of the Big Ten. So I just saw that quote from Paul Finebaum and thought, I don't know that academics are going to be the holdup. I feel like we passed that point. The SEC, it feels, has never taken as big of a priority. I'm not taking a shot at their institutions here. I'm just saying on a conference level, from a realignment standpoint, do you think they evaluated where Texas and Oklahoma rank academically and whether or not they fit? No. They said, we want those schools. Why? They're really good at football. They care about football. They spend money on football. Their fans show up. They'd be awesome brands. We could put Texas against Georgia, which they're doing this year, and boy, what a college football game that figures to be. We could put Oklahoma against LSU. That's a game I'm talking about a little bit later on today's show. We could do all this fun stuff. We could have the Red River Showdown in our conference. Yeah. And, do Florida State and Clemson have the same level of a rivalry that Texas and Oklahoma do? No. But are they two of the larger brands in all of college football? Yeah, the ACC doesn't want them to leave for a reason. I think you would be crazy to just have them available and say, nah, we're good. You're not quite where we want to be academically. Like the Big Ten, even for those presidents, and I've said for a long time, and will continue to say, presidents vote on realignment, not athletic directors. They can influence the discussion, but presidents are the ones who vote. The Big Ten already has a lot of premier, high-end, big-time academic schools. Even if you look at Florida State and Clemson, and FSU specifically in this example is who Paul Finebaum was referring to. Even if you look at them and say, they don't quite rank academically where we'd like to be, is that going to significantly hinder the perception of your conference? Because I just don't see it. I don't see how that is going to be just a major obstacle to you retaining the national perception of this is a premier academic and athletics conference. I mean, you got Michigan in there. That's one of the top schools in the country. I think that, and you now have USC and UCLA in there. UCLA is, when I was applying to schools, I applied to UCLA. I did not get in. That's not why I don't think they'll be very good this year. But like UCLA, I think every year or close to it, and certainly when I was applying to colleges, they were the most applied public school, most applied to public school in the entire country. You just added those schools. You added Washington, which is a big research school. You've got Michigan. You've got Ohio State. You've got Northwestern in the league. I don't think that's making a dent in your academic standing or your ability to cobble together research grants and funding for a university, which is worth billions and billions of dollars. I don't see that being some major obstacle there. So I don't agree with Paul Finebaum that would be the reason. They could have other reasons. I don't know what they'd be because, look, feels like if you're not growing, you're shrinking. That's kind of the vibe, the sense. Teams and programs and conferences, they get really antsy with all this sort of stuff. And if Florida State becomes available and they prefer the Big Ten over the SEC, yeah, you take them. You absolutely take them. I don't think you factor in the academic ranking. Academics will matter not when there's a national championship rematch. And boy, I think it's a bad matchup for Washington. A really bad matchup, and we'll talk about it next. This episode is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. That's simple. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. October 5th, National Championship rematch in Seattle. Does Washington have, any chance here? Vegas doesn't really think so. That's Roman Tomashoff, Locked On Huskies, joining me here on the show. Just answer that question, Roman. Do you think that Washington has a chance to beat Michigan in this spot?
Spencer, I think it's all going to come down to the offensive line. It's going to be the biggest thing. It was in the national championship game, obviously. Mason Graham did his thing. I get Michigan fans once a week commenting over on Locked On Huskies still in nearly July. Oh, everyone and their mom knew Michigan was going to win that game. We're not going to go down that road today. But I think that's what it's all going to come down to, is Washington is going to have a really solid team. Is it going to be last year's team? No, not by any stretch of the imagination. But it's going to be a really solid team. And if Washington can find a way to figure out the offensive line and just make it serviceable, I think that the point spread, I can't remember what it is at this point in time.
I believe it's come down to 8.5.
I might pick Washington in that, in Husky Stadium. It's going to be loud, despite what, the College Football 25 has to say. It certainly is one of the top 25 toughest places to play in college football. So I think that
9.5 is the line.
Yeah, I would take Washington. I would take the spread right now. Certainly wouldn't take the money line, but I would take that spread at this point in time, because Michigan's also replacing a lot of guys.
Yeah, they are. I think this is a horrible matchup for Washington, because last year we all watched the game happen, contrary to what some people think. My opinion of Michigan is the offensive line dominated. The defensive line also disrupted Michael Penix in the offense. You now have a step back at quarterback, I think, on both sides of the ball here for sure. I think you make the case that Washington has a better quarterback situation with Will Rogers at the helm. I like Will Rogers. I think he's really solid, and Michigan doesn't know who their starter is going to be yet. Not much is going to be asked of him, of course. It's going to be a run-centric approach, but that Washington offensive line is so new. And you and I have talked on this show several times before that it was a big question going into the spring. They lost a bunch of guys from their Joe Moore Award-winning unit from a season ago. Like, you have to put that out of your memory, because they lost 2 guys to the NFL and a couple other guys to the transfer portal. There really isn't everybody 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I mean, the numbers get higher than Husky fans would probably like to think. Michigan probably has the best defensive line in the Big Ten, maybe in the country. Certainly they're up there. I have a hard time discounting Georgia in any given season at that position group. But to me, I think that's why this point spread is so big. It opened at 11.5, and I thought that was too big. Now it's under 10. That seems more reasonable to me, just because this game's being played at Husky Stadium. I think the line of scrimmage is why Michigan's a big favorite there, and I think deservedly so, which is probably, in Michigan fans' view, the first good thing I've ever said about the Wolverines ever.
So, first of all, you don't have to be modest. They lost basically everybody along the offensive line. Let's be real about that. Not only is it all 5 stars, there's a couple of the key rotational guys as well. But I certainly agree with all that. The one thing where I have to push back, as the Washington guy, I know it's not obvious or anything, but one thing I've pushed back on is I think the defensive scheme is going to be a whole lot better this year. Where that was something that really struggled in that game early on, where, after the first couple of long touchdown runs from Donovan Edwards, you saw a lot of things change. Chuck Burrell did a really good job of adjusting that. But Washington's new defensive coordinator, Steve Belichick, is really good at limiting explosive plays. We've seen him,
Steve Belichick, just so we're all hearing the same words and names here. Steve, not Bill, Steve.
Yeah, Steve. Hey, Bill's been around. Bill's been doing his thing. He's been helping a little bit. He was there during spring practice. But I think that's something where carrying this defense over is going to be really helpful. Washington got a whole bunch of guys in the transfer portal to help out. I like Ephesians Prysock on the outside at corner. I like Justin Harrington in the nickel playing safety a little bit. That dude can be a real nice extra run defender in the box from safety at 6'3", 220. Cam Broussard from Sac State is somebody that Michigan was actually looking really heavily into, and he ended up choosing Washington, which is a really big win. And then Washington's defensive line is going to be a really big question. And as you said, Spencer, if they can control the line of scrimmage on that side of the ball and just limit Michigan's run game, they're going to have a chance. Do I think they're going to win this game? As of right now, as we're recording this, no. I'm going to say that right now so the Michigan fans can't, come back and throw that at me. But I still think that Washington certainly has a shot, and I think it's all going to just come down to, as you said, the trench play.
Yeah, and on both sides, I just have major concerns. And when you couple that with the way that Michigan wants to play football and is going to play football. I mean, Wink Martindale's defense coordinator for Michigan. On 3rd and 7, Roman, I don't know how much you watch the NFL, but Wink Martindale,
yeah.
is going to blitz. He's going to blitz on,
that.
and that Washington offensive line is going to be under a lot of stress. And then I hear you say, yeah, and they have questions along the defensive line as well. That gives me a lot of pause, because what did Sharon Moore do in that football game? Not ask a lot of J.J. McCarthy. Whoever he's lining up at quarterback, he's not going to lean on him. He's going to lean on Donovan Edwards in that matchup. So I think this game is going to get a lot of hype and attention, as it should. Washington fans are going to want some element of revenge. I think both ways the trenches favor Michigan, and that's just, I think that's just a really, really bad match. I mean, you're talking about a couple of the impact players for Washington defensively, and they're both at the back end of the defense, which is not something Michigan's going to want to challenge a lot, because they can run the football.
I certainly agree with you there, but I want to counter a little bit on the Wink Martindale thing that you said there, because I want to take a look at Jed Fish's offensive scheme, which was one of the best in the country down at Arizona. And they did a really good job scheming that offensive line and developing guys like Jonah Savaena, who's probably going to be a first-round pick next year, like Jordan Morgan, who's first-round pick this past year. A couple of the really, really talented players along that offensive line. So I think I have faith in offensive coordinator and offensive line coach Brendan Carroll, but I also have faith in Jed Fish's scheme, which, wasn't Ryan Grubb. It wasn't the number one explosive offense in the country, but it was top 10, top 15. It was a really, really good offense at, getting the ball out quickly and still finding a way to create explosive plays, with Jeremiah Hunter, with Denzel Boston on the outside, with a really, really nice combination of running backs in Jonah Coleman and Cameron Davis, plus another NFL-friendly scheme. Like, you talk about Wink Martindale with Jed Fish's, where he learned under Mike Shanahan, under Kyle Shanahan, under Sean McVay, and has said himself that his scheme is a combination of those two. And we saw it work really well at Arizona. So those are a couple of reasons that, are they going to win the Huskies the game? Probably not. But I don't think that those things can be discounted.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point to raise. Like, Jed Fish is a very good in-game coach. I want to close with this on Washington's schedule, because the front half, look, I think 5-0 is on the table, and then you could look up and Washington could end the year 7-5. I'm not predicting that right now. I'm just saying it's feasible, because the back half of their schedule gets really tough. Michigan, USC, and UCLA all at home. I don't think UCLA is that much of a problem. Iowa on the road, Penn State, and Oregon on the road. Those are all going to be really, really difficult games to win. What do you think is the game that you kind of circle as big for keeping momentum, or having, a more high floor on what this season can be?
Iowa. I think that's the
pick.
one. Yeah, that's the one I've been banging the drum all offseason over on Locked On Huskies. Everywhere else, and whenever anybody asks me, I have the record set right now at 8-4. That's what I think this team ends the year at. It's because I think they win at Iowa. That's going to be really tough, but I think that Jed Fish's scheme can find a couple of cracks there in the defense, and I think that this defensive scheme is going to do a really good job of shutting down an Iowa offense. I know, that seems like, whatever term you want to use there.
Well, I got no offensive coordinator in there. We'll see if Tim Lester makes a difference.
Yeah, we'll get to that at another time.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Exactly. But I think that that's the one where I look at it and I can say, I say that that's a really big statement to make, where going to Rutgers is the first Big Ten road game. That's one thing. But I think that if you can go into Kinnick and probably Iowa will probably rank inside the top 25. And if you can pull off an upset there, that would be a really, really nice momentum builder and would really raise the floor of this team for the final stretch of the year.
You could very well be coming off the loss against Michigan as well. And if Michigan covers that spread, that can have an impact in the locker room if you lose by more than 10 points at home. And, we'll see how we feel when the game gets closer. But the game is one day closer because, well, you're listening to or watching the show, which means another day has come and gone. We are way, way closer than you think to the college football season. Roman Tomashoff, Locked On Huskies. Appreciate it as always.
Spencer, thanks for having me.
We're talking LSU next. And on that same sort of note, what's their most important game as they go to make the playoff? I think it comes a little bit later in the year than it does for some other teams. That's coming up next. Before we talk Tigers, let's talk FanDuel. I love sports. I'm sure that's probably obvious. I love them so much, I never want them to stop, but as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. And if you're wanting to peruse college football gambling options, FanDuel's got everything you can want. Win totals. They've got conference championship odds, national championship odds, individual games. You can bet every matchup in week 0 and 1. It's all over there. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Who's ready for year 3 of Brian Kelly at LSU? I certainly am, because it means that college football is going to start. But what's their most important game? Not their biggest game, because the biggest game on their schedule is, of course, Alabama. I mean, LSU, Bama. I don't need to tell you anything else. That's the biggest game. It's not the most important game. The most important game is October 12th, which is going to be a loaded week in college football. You're going to have Oregon, Ohio State. I think you've got Florida, Georgia that week, or Tennessee's got a big game that week. I don't remember specifically, but I do know that LSU plays Ole Miss at home. Why is that their most important game of the year? So they open with USC in Las Vegas. That's not their most important game of the year. As they look to get to the college football playoff, I think you're going to have to be 10-2. 9-3 teams will have an argument, depending on schedule, might push for it. I think the committee could get a little jumpy putting in a 9-3 team as an at-large into the 12-team playoff. Whether or not you think that's right, that was my sense of where the committee is going to come down. Maybe not. We've got new conferences with different teams and everything. Maybe they'll treat them supremely different. But if you're 9-3, I think you push for it, but probably end up coming up just short of a college football playoff spot. And certainly no more than one 9-3 team could possibly get in. But that result in the USC game is not going to define LSU's season, because after that, they're going to roll off 4 consecutive wins. They host Nicholls, they go at South Carolina, they host UCLA, they host South Alabama. I do not see them losing any of those games. That is why the Ole Miss game is so important, because after Ole Miss, they go at Arkansas, who I don't have particularly high expectations for, and LSU should win that football game. Yeah, you got a new quarterback and everything. Brian Kelly, year 3, even on the road in Fayetteville, you should win that football game. The Ole Miss game is key. Let's say they lose week 1 to USC. The importance of that Ole Miss game is avoiding the need to be perfect down the stretch when they play a bevy of tough games in order to go 10-2 and make the playoff. And if they beat USC week 1, and then you host Ole Miss and beat them in a big-time kickoff that's likely to be on national television at Tiger Stadium under the lights, then guess what? You're going to be pushing for not just a top 10 ranking in the college football playoff, which I think the first ranking comes out around that time, might be a little bit later than October 12th. You could be pushing for a top 5, because I think USC is a good team. And I know that Ole Miss is going to be a really good team. Both should be ranked in the preseason top 25. USC off an 8-5 year. I still think they should be ranked in the top 25 and are going to have at least 8 wins this year, maybe 9 or 10. But for Ole Miss, that's a game that's going to have a lot of eyeballs. And that's a team that has a tremendous amount of SEC preseason championship hype. And deservedly so. You got a returning head coach, returning quarterback. You got a great roster, good portal class, the best portal class in the country according to 24/7 Sports. That's the game for LSU right there that will define their season. Because if they lose to USC week 1 and they lose that game to Ole Miss, I do not see LSU making the playoff, because down the stretch, they have to go at Texas A&M, not a gimme, host Alabama, not easy, at Florida. If that game were at home, I wouldn't be as nervous. LSU should win, but it's at Florida. Then they host Vanderbilt. Okay, I think it's Vanderbilt. I'm sorry, Vanderbilt, but come on, let's be real here. And then they host Oklahoma. Which of those games outside of Vanderbilt after Ole Miss feel like gimme wins? I think Arkansas on the road is close to, I'm not calling it a gimme win. It's definitely a game I'd have a hard time picking against LSU. Vanderbilt at home, that's a gimme win. Every other game is entirely losable. I know that Florida's win total is low and expectations aren't that high and vibes aren't necessarily the highest, depending on who you are, with regards to Billy Napier's Florida Gators. But you got to go into the swamp. And Florida's not going to be some bad team. I don't think they're terrible. I don't think they're incapable or facing some roster deficit, the likes of which you wouldn't be able to overcome and pull an upset if things go your way. So those 4 games, I think LSU is losing at least one. Can we just agree on that? Can we establish that as a baseline? At Texas A&M, at Florida, hosting Alabama and Oklahoma. If LSU goes 4-0 in those games, they probably haven't lost a game the entire season. So if you pencil in, Sharpie in at least one loss down the stretch, I come back to the Ole Miss game. You're fighting for an SEC championship appearance if you've beaten Ole Miss, because that means you might be taking care of business everywhere else. And regardless of what happens in the USC game, you have a really, really good shot of making the college football playoff. I don't think there's pressure on Brian Kelly to make the playoff in the sense that he's on the hot seat if he doesn't get there. I think the only way Brian Kelly could put himself on the hot seat is if there's some disastrous season that none of us foresee in which LSU goes, 5-7, misses a bowl game, which I don't know how that happens. I really don't. They have a preseason win total of 9.5, according to our friends at FanDuel. Can't remember a time in which a team that had that high of a win total going into the year, even in the SEC, finished with a losing season. Maybe it's happened. Maybe there was a catastrophic injury and it's just slipping my mind right now. But at this point in time, I think LSU's base amount of wins is 8. And yeah, 8-4 would be a disappointing year for LSU. No, I no doubt about it. You might have the best offensive line in the SEC, maybe one of the best in all of college football. There are not a lot of places that can say, yeah, we have not one but 2 tackles that could very easily get drafted in the first round next year. That's a pretty great asset to have for your offense as you try and incorporate a new quarterback who does not have the most playing experience imaginable in Garrett Nussmeier, but certainly has all the talent in the world to be really good. You know what a quarterback's best friend is? A running game. You know how you get a running game? You have a good offensive line. I know, crazy concept. So I think that Ole Miss game is absolutely pivotal and could end up defining the momentum that LSU creates coming down the stretch of the season, which is not something that you can be overlooking if you're a fan of a college football team. Because I think to last year, Miami, they ended the regular season 7-5. They were 4-0 before that Georgia Tech debacle. They win at least 8, maybe even 9 games. I think those sorts of moments can have a real impact. And I think that LSU game at home, if you are able to knock off the Rebels and get revenge for last year, I tell you what, if they have beaten USC by then, suddenly you look at LSU as, hey, they feel like a lock to the playoff because they're not losing more than 2 of the games coming down the stretch. I think they're losing at least 1, but I don't think they're going to lose more than 2. I'd be surprised if all 3 of Texas A&M, Alabama, and Oklahoma knock off LSU. I'd be pretty surprised, and I bet LSU fans would be disappointed. But I like this LSU team. I don't know if I love them yet. I could get talked into it. I could be persuaded. We'll see how they perform week 1 against USC in Las Vegas, neutral site game. I think USC has a chance to win that football game. I really do. I'm not making a prediction right here, right now. That comes later and closer to the season. However, I wouldn't write off USC in that game. But if LSU comes out, makes an authoritative statement, they're favored by 6.5 points. If they win that game by 10 or more, and then they beat Ole Miss, boy, it'll be hard to not look at LSU and say, that might be a national title contender that didn't get enough buzz in the preseason. But as they say, that is why you play the games. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.